Blended Learning in English Language Arts. I'm an English teacher. I teach middle school, and I'll tell you a little bit more about me in the beginning. Blended work is really the best of face-to-face and online instruction, and ideally, it should be seamless. A little bit about me. I'm a middle school English teacher. I also do teacher tech support, and I have a long background in systems development and face-to-face user support. I've been working with Moodle in a blended, or sometimes also called hybrid environment, for 3 years. My big question is always, does this improve learning? That's the most important thing for me. If I'm thinking about doing something and it's a real cool thing to do, but it really doesn't forward learning, then I don't want to do it, much as it would be fun. So that's just my essential question. What I want to talk about today is my focus, which is what works better face-to-face and online, or whether it's which is the best place to do something. And that's a really important decision when you're working in a blended environment, because there are many things you can do in both environments, so you have to decide which is the best. When I'm doing group work, that's very blended. I always want to have meetings face-to-face because it's easier. Certainly, there are digital tools that will help people work together online, but I find that 12 and 13-year-olds have enough trouble working together without having anything get in the way. So I like to use face-to-face whenever I can for that kind of work. That doesn't mean that we're only working face-to-face. They also have a lot of digital tools. They have links to resources. They have a separate team work area, which I'll show you in a moment. And we've also used chats, for instance, the chats that Moodle has for jury deliberations for our mock trial. That helped separate out the jury talking away from class. Even though we did this in the computer lab, I could give the rest of the class something different to do, and the jury did not feel pressured by the interest of the rest of the class. Now, we use discussions a lot, and I'm going to talk about discussions a lot. In this particular case, when we were working on our mock trials, we were using discussion to help us kind of keep track of the problems that were coming up in working in groups. What was going to be the hardest thing? Did they think? What was working and what wasn't? How would they solve a problem if they had a group member who wasn't working, which is always a difficulty with every team. And also, next time we do a mock trial, what do they suggest we do differently? And those are all very helpful for them and for me. We also have a general mock trial discussion for things that come up. I want to show you the group work area because that was very popular. Students we could have used a wiki, but Moodle 1.9 wiki is not so easy to work with, so we use discussion because that's a tool they're very familiar with. And each group had a separate discussion area. Now here you can see all of the threads together. They only would see their group. So they could post, and you can see there's several posts from one group here. They could have several posts. Sometimes there were many, many replies to one thread. One group, they just had one thread that just went back and forth. Other groups had several threads. But they really liked that and tested it out to make sure that it was secure. They really liked that. Slide. Another area that I do a lot of blended work is drama. And there's an important component there that needs to be face-to-face for me as a teacher if I can possibly do it. I teach Shakespeare, and Shakespeare is much better discovered through performance as opposed to go home and read Act 1. Kids really grapple with the language and understand what's going on as they're acting it out in class. and I find that very valuable, and so do they. But we also have lots of discussions on Moodle while that's going on. There's a lot of resources posted on Moodle, and they also do some research, uh, some background research, so that they understand more about either the play we're studying, which is either Macbeth or A Midsummer Night's Dream, or something about life during Shakespeare's time or about Shakespeare himself. And they present the research face to face, because part of my goal is to have them become more competent speakers. Now, another thing, and I will show you a little bit more with those later. Another thing that any English teacher has to do is vocabulary. Now, that's something that I've moved almost entirely online. I don't have a lot of time in class for kids to do studying. I expect them to learn it, but I want them to enjoy learning it. Flashcards have not worked, and I don't have a lot of class time. So I was looking at the Moodle tools. The glossary is great, but it only allows for one entry per word, and I wanted students to all be providing their understanding of the words. I wanted it to be social, and I wanted it to end up being a very rich source of information. So I've created discussion forums just for vocabulary, and each thread is a different word, and as you can see with this one below, there's many replies to some of the words that are shown there. I also have a story that goes with the words in the vocabulary textbook that we use, so that they have words in context, because that's missing from the textbook. And the 7th graders have a series of stories about King Kong, Mothra, and Godzilla. So I have pictures of King Kong, Mothra, and Godzilla that relate to the stories each time we have a new unit. And this is the kind of result that I get from my students. They can give me a definition. They can give me an image. If they give me an image, they have to give me the URL where it comes from, or tell me something else about where it comes from. They use it in a sentence, and they can give definitions. They can give word origins. I had one student who only gave me word origins because that fascinated him. Other students like to do pictures. And it's by the end of the unit, students have many, many different ways of looking at each individual word, and they find it very useful for studying, and they remember the words, and they tend to use them more in their writing. They aren't just doing better on tests, they're using the words more. So that's telling me that that is working. Now, another project that we've worked on is research. Another thing that I have to teach is research skills. And there's a lot of new tools and new skills, particularly in middle school. Kids have, up until now, have gone to Wikipedia and copied and pasted, and I want them to learn how to really do research. I could spend a whole hour just talking about the way that I approach research, and I try and have them select a topic that interests them. But there's a lot of tools that are wonderful tools that are available online, way beyond Google. And one of them is databases, online databases. Our state has some wonderful free research databases that are very accessible, and I teach students how to use those. There's also great tools like Citation Machine and EasyBib for creating a formal bibliography or works cited. And those are skills that kids want to learn, but they take some doing. And so those are some of the things that we work on. Now, in my class, I have a regular classroom, and there is a computer lab that I have I have access to the period that I have those students most of the time. So that's very helpful for when I want to blend learning. Another example of a Moodle tool that I used while we were doing the research was a research journal. I wanted students to be able to reflect on what they were doing, but I also wanted them to tell me about problems they were having so they could vent, and also if there was a roadblock, I could help them. Sometimes it was as simple as my brother won't get off the computer, and giving the student strategies for getting around that. And sometimes it was I can't find any resources, and I would find an article that might be helpful. Now I use the online text assignment, very simple tool, but extremely helpful. And students really liked it. It gave them undivided personal teacher attention, which they really like. It's hard to give that kind of attention to 26 kids in a 42-minute period every day, or even once a week. It's hard to give that kind of undivided attention face to face. And it also was really great for helping me identify problems quickly. And since I made them use the journal once a week, I could quickly catch when students were getting behind. Now, as a teacher, this is what it looked like. Students would see that they were, and they wanted to know that it was private. I used to use discussion threads, and they didn't like that as much. Students would write in a private journal while we were working on this, and you'll notice that I started adding due dates because they got confused by the different ones, so I added due dates to make it easier for them to see. Now on the bottom you can see a typical student entry. He found what he was looking for about Galileo, and he wanted to have more information about what he was going to have to actually have in his essay and in a PowerPoint where he would be presenting for his classmates. So that told me I needed to talk about that more in class. That was helpful. Now, this is what it looks like to you as a teacher. This is really the grade book. When you click on the assignment, you'll see what the student wrote and the beginning of what they wrote, and you can just click on it and see what the student wrote. And then you have a place for you where you can write a comment, and there's a great deal more room than it seems here. You can write quite extensive comments. And it tells you when you last modified it. So if the students has even gone in and modified what they wrote, you can go, oh, let me go take a look. That can be very, very helpful. Now, another place where I've used blended learning has been in evaluating websites. Students really need to know how to evaluate what they find on the internet. They tend to look upon it as, well, if it's on the internet, it must be true. I'm sure you have that issue with your students. And so one of the ways I approach it is to first give them some websites that all turn out to be deliberately bogus, which they enjoy discovering. And then I have a lesson which I created in Moodle 1.9, which forces them through a path of tasks just because they won't do some of those things that I want them to do unless I force them. And occasionally I do have to do that. Just like when you're teaching somebody to play chess, it's nice to use the computer because, well, you can't, the knight only goes this way. You can't do it another way just because you want to. Sometimes kids need to have that little bit of structure. And I'm looking forward to learning Moodle 2's slightly different way of handling that because it's a lot richer. But that's one way that I had students, that was one way that I had students look at it. And we work on this throughout the year. Another one is an example here where I give them a statement. They have to look it up and see if it's true or false. Those were some examples. They have to say where they found the answer and why. And it really helps me see whether they're just skating through the assignment or whether they've really thought about it. And the nice thing is being able to have a face-to-face conversation when somebody's gotten off track or they've made assumptions that aren't valid. Those, you can make those aha moments click very effectively online, face to face. Now the difficulty I have is that if I put it on if I reply to their discussion forums, they don't always go back and look to see if I wrote. So sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So it's helpful to talk to them in person so I'm sure they get the message. Now I also played around with a SCORM package, MyUDo2, that also takes students through the thinking process of evaluating websites. That's another approach that you can take. Now, one thing I do face-to-face, and that's always, and that's proctoring. And that, because that's testing, because it's so much harder to proctor tests online and be sure that the student that you think is taking the test is the one taking the tests. And I have to use the tools that Moodle gives me. I don't have any extra tools available for me in my schools, so I do testing face-to-face. But I've noticed students choose that when we have essay tests, and I often have essay tests because I am an English teacher, students often choose to keyboard their essay tests. So we're going to be taking our final exams next week, and we're taking all of them in the computer lab because students want to do that there because they think so well at the keyboard, which tells you so much about students now. This is their comfort zone. I only have 1 or 2 out of all my students who want to handwrite their work. Another tool that I use a lot outside of Moodle, although the link to it comes in through the Moodle, is surveys. I use them at the beginning of the year to find out students' interests. I use them at the end of the year to find out what students liked and didn't like so that I can tweak what I'm doing. And I use them during the year. One of the things that we have used them for during the year is when we do media literacy study and students are analyzing their own use of media. And sometimes I have them help me create the survey, sometimes not. But we always talk about it afterwards face-to-face, usually in groups, and then I have them use Excel to evaluate what the answers are like so that they're not just looking at it, but they're saying, okay, if I put this on a graph, what would this look like? Because that's part of the skill set that I want them to have. Now at the end of the year, I'm getting some of my survey results already, and this is what some of them have said this year. They liked vocabulary. They like seeing the pictures for the words. They like the fact that they could use a different form of work online instead of writing it with a pen and pencil. Many of them prefer, especially kids that have difficulty holding a pen or pencil for some reason. It's much easier for them to type. It was good to study from because there were all these different sentences. That's talking about vocabulary. I hadn't asked them about vocabulary, but that's what they talked about. That we didn't have to hand things in, we could just put them on the Moodle. And I have to tell you, working with middle school students, anything that they can do without having an opportunity to lose it between when they do it and when they hand it in is always a good thing. It was easy, fun, and we could access it from home. Now, all my students this year have online access at home. I occasionally have a student who doesn't, but they can use the school library where they have online access at school. So it's something that everybody can always do. Now, one of the things that I use a lot is discussion. And the original reason that I started using Moodle was that I wanted students to have a place for secure discussions. And I didn't want the free-flowing kind of stuff that happens on Facebook. I wanted a little bit more meaningful, thoughtful discussion. And for a couple of reasons. One, because it allows for reflection, and in a class discussion, which out of a 42-minute class might only be 30 minutes, there isn't time for that. It just goes fast. And kids talk, and somebody who thinks before they speak really has difficulty being a part of the discussion. It often passes them by. By the time they think of what they wanted to say, the discussion has moved on. This completely eliminates time pressure. They can do it whenever. There is time pressure, there's a due date, but beyond that, they can really do it anytime. And because they're not looking at each other, it really encourages participation. So I find my shy students are much more willing to participate in, they would never raise their hand or say something in a whole class discussion. They might in a small group discussion, but some of them are just painfully shy and wouldn't even do that. And it's been a real good thing for them. I also noticed that this allows students to write more, which I always like because I'm an English teacher, but they perceive it as talking rather than as writing, which is interesting. And their spelling kind of reflects that. Now, here's some examples of the kind of discussions. Sometimes it's thinking outside of the class that I'm looking for. Sometimes it's extending a discussion that we started in class. It may parallel what's going on in class. There's the first examples. These are some discussions having to do with To Kill a Mockingbird. The first discussion was about Jim Crow, where they had to read some resources about Jim Crow and then write about how they would feel if they had to follow those rules now. That was a really paralleling what we were talking about in class. The end word discussion, which was very interesting, extended a discussion that started in class, but kids felt more comfortable talking about it when they weren't looking at each other. Why is the title To Kill a Mockingbird was something that just extended our discussions that we've been having all along in class. Below, in the second one, I have examples from mock trial, which I showed you before. And then at the bottom are some discussions about, this was having to do with A Midsummer Night's Dream. And I started with asking them who should decide who they should marry, which they found the idea that parents might choose who they would marry was kind of shocking. And they said in certain terms what they wanted out of that. I also had a discussion about the mechanicals because they're so different from the royals and the fairies in the play. These are the guys that are putting on the play within the play, the world's worst version of Romeo and Juliet. And I asked them to tell me why they thought, I asked students why they thought the mechanicals were so different from everybody else. And they had very interesting insights. Then I had a discussion about why are the lovers so similar, because you have Helena, Hermia, Demetrius, and Lysander, and when we're acting it out in class, I use color-coded costumes to keep them straight, because when you first meet them, they seem so similar. Now, the students often will write, they're not similar at all, which is wonderful that they feel that. But I love discussions because everybody gets a chance to participate, and it changes the class dynamic. I'll never forget the time that one of my students said to another one, I never knew how smart you were. I was talking to a very shy student who normally never talks in class, but had been participating in online discussions, really adding to everybody's understanding, wonderful insights, and nobody ever would have known about that if we hadn't had the online discussions. It's hard for those 4 or 5 kids that raise their hands all the time because they don't get to dominate anymore. But I think that's a good thing. Now, another way I've used discussion is for students to share work. Recently, we were working on parodies, and students did very different kinds of parodies, and I wanted them to be able to post them in one place so that they could share them with each other. Now, they did present them in the face-to-face classroom, but I still wanted them to have a place, a repository for them to go and look at each other's work. It didn't work as well as I expected. We had a lot of technical difficulties. Students have different hardware at home than we have at school. The file was too big or the format didn't work right. And so some things just didn't make it there. We had to be quite creative. Sometimes they had to bring their work in on a flash drive and put it on my computer and share it in class. And sometimes that's the only thing that worked. So if you haven't already learned this one, plan for technical glitches. I've also used the assignments, which I talked about before, for other things too. Besides something private, I also use them as a way for students to hand in work. The Moodle assignment's very versatile. And for instance, I had my 7th graders create a PowerPoint. They were learning how to use it as an interactive poster. We don't have a lot of bandwidth in my school, so we end up using PowerPoint for a lot of things. We don't have the bandwidth for Glogster. We don't have the bandwidth for Prezi. But PowerPoint has a lot of features to it that we have mined considerably. And so I showed them how to use PowerPoint to make something very like a Glogster. And they called it special effects. And they were to create a poster incorporating a lot of interactivity and a lot of activity, and to advertise a product that they had invented. And they went to town with it. And the nice thing about assignments is that it puts them all in one place. Then when it's time for students to share their work in class, where I want them to work on their speaking skills, which have increased tremendously because of the opportunity to do this, it was so easy because their work was all right in one place. Of course, it makes it easy to grade too. Now, logistics are probably the biggest, I'm not going to say headache, but concern when you're trying to make this all work. Now, that's true whether you're teaching online or whether you're teaching blended. Now, remember, my objective is, what do you want your students to learn? One thing I've learned is that always to introduce new skills and new activities face-to-face. We can't assume that our students have the skills. They're often very adept at surfing. They're great at playing video games, but there's holes in what they know and what they don't know. And not everybody has the confidence to just go ahead and try stuff. And for everyone who will go ahead and try stuff, there's 2 or 3 that aren't so sure. And if they're addressing it at home in front of their computer with maybe no siblings or parents who can help them, it's really a problem. And they're frustrated and unhappy, and that's not what I want. I want them to feel success. So we usually go to the computer lab the first time we're trying something new. And once I feel like most of them understand it, then I let them go. Now, when I first give them a task, I don't show them a lot about how to do it because they don't listen. Middle schoolers really just want to do. They don't have any patience at all. So I tend to give them the resources and the task, and then I let them make mistakes. Sometimes after about 5 or 10 minutes, they're more willing to listen to, why don't you try this? But they learn a lot from their mistakes, and they help each other. They're very generous with each other, and often they'll show each other a better way to do it than I would have shown them. Also, instructions are useful face-to-face, but even when I have them face-to-face, I give them written instructions. Partly that's because they don't listen, and partly that's because I always have a number of kids who have learning disabilities, and they need the written instructions that to give them a little extra help. Thanks for being here, Lynn. Anyway, there's an example. Take the directions. I've always put them right at the top of the Moodle course. It's the first thing the students see, although sometimes they ignore it. It tells them exactly what I want them to do. And then if they say, what do I do again? I can say, what do the directions say? And I'm sure your students don't all listen, so it's very useful to say, what do the directions say? When they're driving you crazy with, what are we doing again? Also, when students are working online, sometimes they're working online and I want to make sure that they understand what they're doing. One thing I've learned to do is to include the due date within the activity that students are doing. That's really made it easier for them to remember. It's extra work for me the next year to change the dates, but it's so useful. Since I've added the due dates, they've gotten much better about getting them done on time. Also, if something is a new skill, I often create a short video using Jing that they can access. Now, Jing they can access at school. I don't like to use YouTube at school because it's blocked for students, and Jing is not. So Jing is a great versatile tool, and short videos are all they're going to pay attention to anyway, so that works very well. And another alternative, if students have technical difficulties, as a teacher, I check my email a lot because kids get stuck, they get stalled, they forget their password. It's really important to be there for them. This is something I know I'm preaching to the choir. Organization. Moodle is great, even despite the scroll of death. The units, most of us teach units, and that works very well with the topics organization. In K-12, we do units, which may span several weeks. It's very different than the higher education. And I have to say, some topics change because it's a new unit. Some things stay the same all year, like vocabulary study. That's something that we continue from week to week and month to month. This is an example. On the top, I have the Parody unit, and you'll notice I use pictures. I use a lot of pictures. My students are very visual, and they respond well to pictures, often funny pictures. The Parody unit includes a picture. It also includes the study guide and a place for them to post their parodies. And that was a discussion forum because there were so many different formats that they were using. But below it you can see a place for everything, which is where the homework help discussions, the coffee house, which is for off-task discussions, which they love, and the vocabulary, which can be quite extensive below that. And that has the picture, the stop picture, which they also really enjoy. And this is always right under the vocabulary discussion. The place for everything is always right underneath the whatever the activity unit is, so that they always know where to find it. Expectations. Obviously, it's important for you to have an acceptable use policy that talks about both the behavior you expect and the consequences if you don't get it. I work with young adolescents. They act before they think. Sometimes they do dumb stuff. Occasionally they're mean to each other, so that has to be addressed. That's something you need to make crystal clear in your acceptable use policy. It needs to talk about behavior online that includes your Moodle. You also need to communicate with parents, especially important in K-12. I, at the beginning of the year, give parents, because this is new to most of them, I explain why I use Moodle, and I give examples. I also let them know that I monitor, and my students know too, that I monitor what's going on and that there are consequences for inappropriate behavior, because parents worry about bullying in particular. But they worry about all kinds of things, but that's a particular thing that they worry about online. I also provide alternatives. If a student or a parent for some reason doesn't want their child to work on the Moodle, I say that I will provide alternatives. It's extra work for me, but I'm not going to stop using it for one student. I will find ways for that student to still get the work done. Monitoring. This is a big part of, and it's not the part that the students know anything about, but it's a big part of what you as a teacher do. We do this in a face-to-face classroom all the time. We have to do this online as well. You have to identify behavior, appropriate, inappropriate, progress that students are making, and any problems that are coming up. I love the way Moodle will send me an email every time one of my students posts on a forum. And as you can see the example in the picture, if you've forgotten to say subscribe to this forum when you were creating the forum, you'll see it there when you first go into the forum and go, oops, yep, subscribe to this forum, and you will get an email. I tend to read them quickly and delete them. They come in because of the piecemeal way they come in. I don't use that for grading. I want to grade all at the same time. But I find it very useful for keeping track of work that students are doing on forums, particularly the off-topic forum, because occasionally they have gone places they shouldn't go in their discussions. I get emails when students upload work, so I have a feeling for, yep, everybody's doing it the night before, or know that they're doing it spaced out, or a lot of kids haven't done it, so I need to touch base with them online to find out, in class, face-to-face, to find out what's getting in the way. But here's what the emails look like if you've never seen one. So helpful. It shows the breadcrumbs at the top to show me where this is on the Moodle. It has the subject area, who sent it, the date, the contents, so I don't even have to go read it. And then if I should have to reply directly, there's a link right there for me to click on. That'll take me right into the Moodle. I just love that. So helpful. Moodle provides so many ways of doing assessment and providing feedback online. Chats, discussions, wiki, reflections, quiz, so many, and I'm working now, starting to work with Moodle too, and I'm actually starting to use the quiz module because it's a lot easier to use. The gradebook provides a place for comments that's private. Assignments also provide private feedback. Forum posts that you as the teacher make are public, and sometimes young adolescents are so fragile, they take, you can give them negative feedback privately, but they take it very badly publicly. So you have to really be careful about what you would post on a forum post, usually, unless you need everybody to know that you're dealing with behavior that's bad and you're going to shut it down. In that case, sometimes the public post is the way to go, so other kids know, yep, she's not going to put up with that. But online, as useful as it is, face-to-face is wonderful for having private conversations. This is something you're doing that really is a problem. Do you understand why? Or that really was a good start, but it's not enough, and what do you think you could do? It's also a great place for private and public attaboys. Boy, that was a great post you did last night. I really enjoyed reading that. It's good for the other kids to hear that too. Now, once again, blended learning, I think, is the best of face-to-face and online instruction. Used together, they're so effective. My students, if I stopped using it, they're already asking me, are you going to have the Moodle up over the summer so we can still do things? That tells me that something that they enjoy, as well as something that they learn through. My summary is come up with your learning objectives first, decide what belongs face-to-face versus what belongs online, and then figure out your logistics. How can you make this work? And I know there aren't very many of you here right now. That's okay. If you'd like to get in touch with me through the discussion forum later, if you don't want to do anything in the chat right now, that's fine. I've got some resources that are here, but they're also on the page in the iMoot. I have a sample website that gives some examples of some of the work that I've done. It doesn't have student work, of course. The docs that are on ScribD include some things like the acceptable use policy that I use, my email, my Twitter, and my blog. If any of those are helpful to you, those are all also ways, most of those are ways to reach me if you have questions, or if you'd like to talk about how you'd like to do things. Finally, any questions? Well, again, if you have questions, please get in touch with me. Via email or the discussion forum. I look forward to talking to you.
Hi,
yes.
Francis. It's Meg here from the iMoot
Hi.
team. I've come in to help Mark this morning. We've sent the boys off to get some sleep, I think, so hopefully they're catching
Good.
up.
I'm glad. You
But
must
thank
be
you for your
exhausted.
presentation. I came in about halfway through, so I'm going to go back and have a look at yours because I found that as an ex-teacher, I found that really interesting. So I'm going to go and have a look through it and see what I can add to my skill set. So thank you very much for presenting for us today. I'm assuming you put your slide up on your course for everyone to have a look at.
Okay, yes, I've already done that.
And
So
as usual, the recording.
okay, well, thank you very much. Good night or good morning.
Thank you, friends. This has been great listening to you. Yes, morning over here. Good
Yeah.
night for you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you.